All right, good afternoon. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee. Today is September 16th, 2015. It's about 1:35 p.m. We're starting a little bit late. I'm Councilmember Blong Yang, Chair of this committee. With me today are Council President Barb Johnson, Councilmember Abdi Warsami, and Councilmember Cam Gordon. And I believe Councilmember Palmisano is going to join us in a little bit, and Councilmember Reich has city business to attend to. Today we have several items on this agenda, and we're going to move the agenda around a bit. But item number 1 is a public hearing. We have from item number 2 until item number 8 consent items. And we have a discussion item for item number 9. And we also have a walk-on today, which is in item number 10, which is an update on public safety in the warehouse district. And I'm going to ask the clerk, do we need to have a motion with regards to the walk-on item to add it on?
You can move to amend the agenda to add that item.
Okay. Well, I will move for the amended agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. And with that, we will first address the consent items. So I'm going to start with item number 2 and just go on. Item number 2 is 2015 Emergency Management Performance Grants. Item number 3 is the Minnesota Board of Firefighter Training and Education Training Reimbursement Redistribution. Item number 4 is Minnesota GI Bill on the Job Training Apprenticeship Program Funds. Item number 5 is Zero Towards Death Traffic Enforcement Partnership Program Grant. Item number 6 is a Minnesota Department of Commerce Contract Amendment. Item number 7 is the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension Contract Amendment. And item number 8 is an Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Grant application. Council members, any questions on those consent items? Right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the consent items carry. And the next item that we will put forth in front of us is the public hearing, and this is with regards to emergency service fees for technical rescue response ordinance. And this is considering passage of an ordinance amending Title IX, Chapter 173 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances related to fire and police protection fire, adding a new section 173.220, establishing fees for certain emergency protection services within the city. And, just since we're going to have this public hearing, we will begin with the public hearing, but I'm going to start with Council President Barb Johnson. I'm introducing this a bit, and then after that, we will have a public hearing, and the process will begin as such. For anybody who wants to speak to this issue, please sign up with the clerk or close to where the clerk is. And please sign up, as soon as you can. When we open up the public hearing, we will allow each speaker to speak for 3 minutes, and then we will continue until all speakers are allowed to address the committee. When you address the committee, please state your name and address for the record, your organization if you represent one, and whether you support or oppose the ordinance. And then after that, committee members will be allowed the opportunity to ask questions. Council members, any questions with regards to this process? All right, well, seeing none, Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This ordinance is proposed in response to a number of requests for service that the fire department has been involved with, actually our police department as well, but then also emergency providers for these rescues that take place in grain elevators, structures that are boarded. People have noticed that they're not to be in this place, and it ends up being an extraordinary amount of dollars that are used to get people out of these very life-threatening situations. And in some cases, we had one fatality this year in several rescues. So I'm going to ask Mr. Fussy, who's the attorney that worked on developing this proposed ordinance, to explain the details, and then we'll have a public hearing, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I was asked by Council President Johnson and to work in conjunction with the fire department in particular to look at some of the options for cost recovery and the types of scenarios that the Council President outlined. What this ordinance does is kind of twofold. It basically uses the authority that has been granted to all cities by the state through a series of statutes that are referenced in the ordinance to impose charges in limited circumstances. And actually the state statutes that authorize fire departments and rescue services to charge for emergency responses are very broad. Generally, most cities, and Minneapolis in particular, have taken the view that most of those responses should be paid for out of the general fund. And I think that that's still largely the case, even with the adoption of this ordinance. But through that authority, what this ordinance does is twofold. The first of which is just to formalize a program that has already existed for upwards of 10 years and has been authorized through other council action, in which largely motor vehicle emergency responses and extrications are charged for through some contracting that the fire department does with an organization called Transmedic. Almost all insurance policies carry coverage for such municipal emergency responses to personal injury, motor vehicle accidents. And so it's basically just taking, using that authority to recoup some of the cost. And so the part that talks about motor vehicle accident services is nothing new for the city. It's a program that already exists, and it's just formalizing that program into ordinance. The new part, as Council President Johnson spoke of, is imposing a charge for what's referred to as technical rescue service. However, that will only be triggered in cases in which the technical rescue service is required because of a person's illegal activity. In most cases, that would be trespassing, although some other possible triggers are included. For instance, the code already contains an ordinance 385.390, which prohibits people from illegally scaling down or up buildings. And so in those types of scenarios in which emergency response rescue services are required based on somebody's kind of intentional lawbreaking and putting themselves in a dangerous situation, it will allow for some degree of cost recovery. The rate schedule that's included and that was developed in consultation with the fire department includes probably some fairly modest charges, but it would include a $577 fee for the a $721 fee for the first 2 hours of the emergency response, and a $300 fee for each additional hour or fraction thereof afterwards. Chief Friedel is here, and he can certainly speak to the experiences that the fire department has had, maybe some more frequency recently, but the experiences that they've had in this area. It's fairly rare from my understanding. We're not anticipating that this ordinance would be put into action very frequently, but we do think it would be a valuable tool to recover some of the costs from these sorts of scenarios. And it is, as I mentioned, authorized by existing state law. And so I guess I'd ask Chief Friedel if he had any additional comments that he thought might be relevant for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Fussy. And Chief, if you don't mind, we're going to open up the public hearing, and then we'll do that, and then we'll bring you up for a presentation, and then we'll, allow the council members to ask you some questions, if that's okay. All right, so we will open up the public hearing. Anybody signed up for the public hearing? All right, that makes it easy. Anybody want to speak on this issue? All right, going once. Going twice. Okay, we will close the public hearing. Chief Friedel, why don't you come up and give your presentation? And then Councilmember Gordon's the first on deck to just ask you some questions.
Okay.
But why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Chairman Yang. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll just open myself up to questions to the committee, and if Councilmember Gordon has a question, I'll be more than happy to answer that question in regards to the ordinance.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if this is a question for Mr. Fussy or not. And I'm supportive of this. I have a couple concerns. And one of them relates to if we're required to charge in all instances. It says that the city may, well, that's the other one. It says, it talks about any persons shall be jointly liable for all qualifying service charges. And then it talks about billing and charging. And I'm wondering if there's any discretion on the part of the city in this matter.
I can handle that question. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon. A lot of the wording in this ordinance is patterned after a model ordinance from the League of Minnesota Cities, and certainly there would be some discretion involved there, particularly with the technical rescue responses. One of the, I guess, eligible parties for billing would be the owner of the property. However, I think there would be discretion there since they would be jointly and severally liable with any of the trespassers or persons who ended up being rescued for the city to look at the particular facts of the case and determine who they might pursue a judgment against.
I appreciate that. And so I'll just kind of voice my concern or my thoughts around this because there's been 2 fatalities actually in my ward with some grain elevators there. And just reading this and thinking about this, and I was trying to imagine, well, who would be the person then who goes back to the parents of that child who's been killed and tries to do this. I really appreciate it. See, the property owner is also liable, but I also appreciate that there is some discretion, and we can consider some different factors before we pursue that, because it could be an enormous hardship for some people and not at all for others, and that I also appreciate that it's kind of capped. I mean, for a lot of us, that's an awful lot, $721, but I know that's probably not actually recovering the costs involved with all the men and all the equipment and women and others who are there. And I know that we've actually had to bring in rescue doctors to help with these things. So I think we're just recouping some of our costs. So I appreciate that, and I'm supportive. I don't really have any other direct questions. I just kind of wanted to raise that issue.
Chief, why don't you continue? Do you have anything more to say about this?
No, I think I'm good with that.
Okay. Chief, I have a quick question for you. I mean, just for the viewing public, it talks about motor vehicle accidents as well. And so, run-of-the-mill motor vehicle accidents, they don't get charged for anything, do they? I mean, the fire department has to show up and rescue somebody or get somebody out of a car before you get charged for something, right, in this ordinance?
That's correct. Anytime that, in terms of this ordinance, as far as the billing goes, when our crews respond and they do an extrication of a patient, in other words, you get the rescue tools out and there's an extrication event and patient assessment completed, and then they are transported to a hospital care setting, then there would be billing towards that fund.
Council members, any other questions? Maybe. Oh, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is probably a question for the city attorney, and I'm not sure if there's an answer, but since this kind of policy has been looked at the Minnesota League of Cities, I'm curious how this might affect people's liability insurance that they have to carry with their property. Have we seen in places that similar policies have been implemented that this has a really onerous impact on liability insurance? I mean, granted, one of the things we're trying to get is for people to secure, their space, grain elevators and that sort of thing. But does this become an extra burden on any property owner in that way from what you've seen at the League of Minnesota Cities?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Palmisano, the model ordinance actually that the league has promulgated is the broader type ordinance that I spoke of that actually would authorize fire departments to charge for any time they responded to a car fire or a structure fire or any sort of emergency response. Particularized to this sort of trespassing activity, technical response issue, I can't say that I've seen any Minnesota cities that have enacted a particular ordinance targeting only that. There are some similar jurisdictions nationwide. I know that Arizona has a state statute along those lines, and some other jurisdictions do. So I'm not sure how that might affect the insurance equation. I would say again that because the charges that are included in the rate schedule are relatively modest. I can't imagine that it would have, at least in terms of property insurance, any kind of substantial effect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Council President Johnson, would you like to move that?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the ordinance.
Okay. Council members, any discussion on this? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, we will go to discussion item number 9, which is Contract Compliance Division second quarter report, and that's with Karen Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council members, for the record, my name is Karen Francois. I'm the director of the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights Contract Compliance Division. The Contract Compliance Division ensures that women, minorities, and low-income workers and businesses have fair and equitable access to the city's procurement process. I'm here today to present the division's 2015 second quarter report. In the second quarter, 5 construction and development projects with minority business inclusion and women business inclusion goals were closed by the division with a total contract value of $3.8 million, of which 15% went to minority business enterprises and 16% went to women business enterprises. I would just like to remind the council that closed projects are those construction and development projects where construction is complete and the division has conducted an administrative closeout process, which includes verification of payments made to MBEs and WBEs. At the last hearing, Councilmember Gordon requested that we look at trends. We decided to look back since 2013, which was the first full year after the adoption of the MNUCP certification, the SUBP ordinance, and the 25% annual goal. Since then, MBE and WBE participation on closed construction projects has consistently increased. Through the end of the second quarter of 2015, 25 construction and development projects with MBE and WBE inclusion goals were closed by the division with a total contract value through the end of the second quarter of $48 million. Of that, 7% went to WBEs and 7% also went to MBEs. We expect that by the end of the 2015 year, we will surpass the 2014 numbers. Of the 5 closed projects in the second quarter, 13% of workforce hours went to minorities and 3% went to women. Looking at the trend since 2013, female and minority workforce inclusion on closed construction projects has consistently increased. In 2013, 5% of total workforce hours went to women and 17% were performed by minorities. In 2014, 6% were performed by women and 18% were performed by minorities. Through the end of the second quarter of 2015, of the 35 construction and development projects with workforce inclusion goals that were closed by the division, 4% of the total workforce hours have gone to women and 19% were performed by minorities. We do expect that number to increase by the end of the year. We are also working closely with the industry relations manager at the Minneapolis Employment and Training Program, referring general contractors to get help with that office to meet their workforce inclusion goals. And also as a result of the best practices roundtable that we hosted here at the city is now a part of a regional workforce collaborative looking at ways to increase workforce inclusion on construction projects across the region. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.
Council members, any questions? Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you, and I appreciate the trends and the comparisons and the goals. I just had one question about the report where, not the slide presentation, but we go through some of the projects, and I noticed that the Downtown East Green Space project had a very high percentage of minority in the workforce, 65%. And I'm wondering, is that so far all we're dealing with is the demolition part of that? And is that do you know what that's referring to? Is it just the demolition of the Star Tribune building that's going on right there in that commons area?
I do not have the answer to that question.
Well, I just thought that was, it's unusual we see a percentage that high on a project, so it was great, and it could easily bring up all our numbers, something like that. So maybe maybe you can help me find out, and I'd be interested to see, because if it's just for the demo, it may be that in the end, the project isn't quite as high a percentage.
Okay.
Council President Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, Councilmember Gordon, when I think about it, I would like that information too, because I think the last time we had some questions about the Ryan project because they hadn't turned their numbers in or something. So, you know what I mean? Remember that from the last meeting?
I think actually, Council President Johnson and Mr. Chair, that at that point, there were no minorities and women who had been working on the project yet, because we only count the goal to date for those projects, or for those minorities and women who have actually worked on the project and been paid.
Okay, I just, so I guess I'm interested then to know if we're talking about the whole Ryan project, which includes those two towers, that would be.
I do not believe that it does, but I will find out.
That, you know what, if we don't have that as part of our report, I'd be interested in that, the two towers that have been constructed, what the workforce participation is on those. Because they're not complete, but they're pretty well underway. So, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Right, seeing none, I will move to receive and file this report. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Here we have our last item for discussion, and I think the item that a lot of folks here are here for. So, this is an update on public safety in the Warehouse District, and introducing this matter is Councilmember Jacob Frey. Councilmember Frey, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Yang, members of the committee. Today, I want to discuss what is perhaps one of the most important issues that we deal in governance, which of course is public safety, and not just any public safety, but specifically that downtown. And before I get underway, I want to point out that I do not want to undermine the problems faced in North Minneapolis, because sometimes we talk about shootings that happen in either South or downtown and disregard that which happens in North, and I realize that is extremely significant. That being said, you cannot have a world-class city without a world-class downtown, and you can't have a world-class downtown unless it's safe. And with the uptick that we have seen, specifically in violent crimes involving a gun, I felt that it was necessary and essential that we not ignore it, that we take action, and that we acknowledge that there needs to be change and improvement. Specifically in the Warehouse District, which is our entertainment hub of our downtown and arguably our city, we've encountered substantial problems. We have a dynamic where we have the light rail running directly through. We have countless people unloading onto the streets at approximately 2 a.m. We have a very large presence of police officers. We've got issues with the traffic flow, with the sidewalks, with everything from public safety directly to hospitality, and I feel strongly that it needs to be dealt with. And specifically, this last weekend, sadly, there was another shooting. There was a shooting in which someone was killed in North Minneapolis, but in downtown, there was a series of gunmen that shot. I think the inspector can probably comment more in depth than the specifics, but at least 6 bullets. And there was a total disregard for the safety of others in the area. And it needs to be, I feel strongly that it needs to be addressed, which is why I'm here today. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak about it. And perhaps one of the most scary things is that those shooting the guns were not deterred by the very large cop presence that was in the area. We had 6 police on horses, 6 police on bike, 6 police on foot, and notwithstanding that critical mass of MPD, they still brought a gun and shot it. And anytime you're bringing a gun and shooting in a public area, I think it goes without saying that it's ridiculous and it's got to stop. So I'm here to address those issues, and though I am not the expert, I would like to invite up first Inspector Jose, who will give a rundown of the dynamic that we are facing in the warehouse district and downtown generally, and followed by our Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman. I really appreciate their presence here today. And this is an issue that's important not just for downtown, but for the entire city. As we move forward, we want people to feel safe and comfortable downtown, and we as a city lose revenue and monies and activity and excitement if it's not entirely safe. So first, I'd like to bring up Inspector Mike Jose, and if that's all right, and he'll give a rundown of what happened.
Inspector Jose, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here today, Chair Yang, and Public Safety Committee. Councilmember Frey asked me to come and speak, and I wasn't sure exactly what all you would like to hear, but I thought I would just give a brief rundown of what took place when this incident went down. It was Friday night, downtown bar activity taking place. We had a normal crowd for a Friday night, which is a fairly large crowd. We had our normal officers working that night, which includes mounted police, bicycle officers, foot beats, and regular routine patrol officers. This incident happened late into the evening. It was near the end of what we consider to be bar close, which is 2:30 at night, when it's a half hour after the bars have shut down, and usually the crowds are fairly well dispersed, and it's starting to quiet down. I was working that night. I was out there with the officers. We had started making rounds, just wandering to look for any crowds that were still hanging around and any concerns. And I actually had commented that it looks like it's going to be a quiet night, and that was at 2:30. Unfortunately, that was a premature statement on my part, and at 2:34 last Friday, going into Saturday morning, there was gunfire that did take place downtown in the area of 5th and Hennepin, 5th and 1st, near the train platform there. And just for reference, this was a weekend where they were not running trains. There was actually less traffic in that immediate area because they were doing some work on the train. So there were no trains actually running this night. And when the gunfire, at the time that this rang out, there were a significant number of police officers in that block. Councilmember Frey did describe it quite well. There were 6 mounted police officers, there were bike officers, and there were officers on foot in that exact block when this happened. And it simply appears that we had a couple of individuals that clearly had a prior beef that they chose to they made a very poor choice and decided to end it with gunfire on that night. And what took place immediately following that was officers chasing these individuals down. And several people were apprehended and 2 weapons were recovered. and no officers fired any weapons. There was no use of force to the extent of mace or tasing or anything like that. It was just simply taking the individuals into custody and very little resistance at that point from the suspects. And we did restore order fairly quickly after that, and the incident was over. At that point, we just tended to, there were 6 people that were injured, and ambulances were called, and officers attended to those victims until ambulances arrived and took them away. And we were very fortunate that it was not life-threatening injuries that anyone received that night. We were very happy that we were able to get everybody safely to the hospital. It was excellent work by the police officers. There were 4 sergeants working that night, so there was good supervision down there. And the message definitely that has gone, that should go out, is that it is not acceptable behavior. We will definitely take swift action anytime something of this nature happens, and it doesn't have to get to this level for us to take action. But a message clearly is that when you choose to make a poor decision like this downtown, there will be consequences. People have been apprehended, and I believe Hennepin County Attorney Freeman will speak to the charges, but there's also an awful lot of evidence collected at the scene, and then follow up with a significant amount of video